Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile 1 discussion. Next week, the Legacy of Phrecia event is going live. We've finally got a release date for it. If you're in the United States and similar time zones, you can expect it to be on Thursday. If you're in Europe, you can expect it to start Thursday late at night. And if, like me, you're in Australia, it's going to be Friday morning. This is going to be one day earlier in the week than league starts usually are, and possibly nudged a little bit because of daylight savings. Additionally, the Legacy of Phrecia event, we've got some more information about what exactly to expect. Now, if you haven't been following the other coverage of this event, this is going to be somewhat of a what-if event. This is going to be answering the question, what if the familiar systems at the heart of PathOfExile 1 have been designed a little bit differently? One of these is going to be an alternative to the Atlas tree. I feel like that component of the event is going to be pretty breakable. I wouldn't be surprised if the idol system ends up being completely busted, and we end up seeing more loot dropping in this event than we've seen in anything, with the possible exception of Affliction and Necropolis leagues. But I think we're going to see a very large amount of broken strategies that people come up with when it comes to endgame farming. Also, there'll be 19 different Ascendancy classes to the core ones that exist in the game. Now, Grinding Gear Games have put up a Legacy of Phrecia event trailer. I'll put a link to that down in the description below. This one's an interesting one if you played PathOfExile back when the Labyrinth was added, back when Ascendancy, the expansion, came out. All that time ago, Grinding Gear Games did a video that was an introduction to that. This is an homage to it, and it will be really obvious when you're watching it, if you were someone who watched that video back then. Now, it wouldn't be a Grinding Gear Games event without an MTX promo being available. If you create a new character in the Legacy of Phrecia event and level them all the way to 80, you'll receive a cosmetic armor set. This is going to be something you can use in both PathOfExile 1 and PathOfExile 2. Worth noting that if you're primarily a PathOfExile 2 player, you'll find it considerably easier to reach level 80 in PathOfExile 1 than the equivalent feat in PathOfExile 2. XP is just faster in POE 1, and on top of that, the campaign just has less running around. Even if you're more experienced with POE 2 than POE 1, you'll probably hit level 80 faster. Now, some people like to play the game on hard mode. You'll have the option of playing with the hardcore rule set if you want that. You'll have the option of playing with the solo self-found rule set if you want that. And also you can have any combination of those two. You can also play with the Ruthless rule set, although it's not entirely clear from Grinding Gear Games' wording whether there's every combination of Ruthless with the other two rule sets or not. Other critical information about the event, yes, this is available for our console friends. It is not solely a PC event, it is available on console. It's going to be based on Settlers of Kalgur, which means that you will have access to both the Settlers of Kalgur challenges and also the Settlers of Kalgur mechanics. The most significant of these is going to be recombination. Recombination means that there will be a very, very, very good gear, especially in the chest slot. That's going to be something that for people who know exactly what they're doing will come online very, very quickly. A while ago, I did a recap on how to set up your town in Settlers. The thing is that they're going to be making some changes to it to make it a little bit easier. So I'll put a link to that video down in the description below if you want to recap on that. But it will be easier than it was, and also some of the nuances might change. Maybe that video will still end up useful. There are 4 new Ascendancies that were teased today. Firstly, we have the Bog Shaman. I don't want to go into a deep dive into all of these, mostly because they've just come out, so there's definitely going to be things I miss. But something I do want to point out, if you've wanted to play with skills like Soul Rend for a while, then both Toad Pact and Pandemic provide a fair bit of power for that. Toad Pact has a bit of a drawback. You lose some resistances, but you can easily get those back on gear. You do need to spend to get them back on gear, but you can do so. In exchange for that, you get a whole bunch of extra skill effect duration, as well as area of effect and projectile speed. Projectile speed on Soul Rend is probably actually not useful, but it's not catastrophic to have it there. And then what's really important is behind that you've got Pandemic, which has a drawback on it as well, but gives you 40% more damage over time. That is something that's sorely needed on chaos damage over time builds. The other thing that Toad Pact Pandemic would be really good for is for Bane, so maybe this is the opportunity to play chaos damage over time, if that's what you're interested in doing. There's also a whole bunch of other things here that provide a really powerful upside in exchange for a really severe drawback, and this will be definitely fun to build around and see what you can manage to pull off. In particular, I'm keen to play around with Nightblood. Nightblood causes your skills to gain a base life cost equal to 25% of their base mana cost, so that's a big drawback, and it also means you can't use it with Chaos Inoculation. The upside, spells you cast yourself gain added flat physical damage equal to 80% of their life cost, if the life cost is not higher than the maximum you could spend. Now, some of you might be immediately thinking here that this sounds like it could be very interesting in conjunction with life tap. Suddenly, this is making life tap support provide a tremendous amount of additional damage, as well as all of the utility that life tap support normally provides. So that's something that could be really interesting there, with a whole variety of different spells and skills. Lots of cool things in the Bog Shaman. The Behemoth is next. The one that you can't read because my face is in the way reads melee hits fortify, regen 0.2% of life per second per fortification. But the thing that transforms everything on this is Rampager. Rampager has an overwhelming drawback on it. Spell skills deal no damage, your spells are disabled. This is a huge drawback and you are forced to take these points. However, because the drawback is so severe, there are a whole lot of things that are beyond it that you can take that are really strong. Now, it's important to note, this is actually not the only Ascendancy that has this drawback, although the Polytheist, it's only one of the options, you're not forced to take it. The thing that's really interesting here, though, is that with this Ascendancy, the Behemoth, there's a whole bunch of really interesting things behind it, like, for instance, 2% increased attack damage per 450 armor, which is something you can normally only get on the unique item Replica Dreamfeather, but now you can get that on any weapon in the game, including tri-element weapons. So if you're willing to put up with the massive drawback that is Rampager, then Steel-Willed is going to be ridiculously strong. One of the strongest Ascendancy notables in the entire game. However, you're not going to be able to provide your own auras because your spells are disabled. And what is every aura in the game? Every aura in the game is a spell. So you're going to have a lot of trouble finding ways to build around this. I don't think this is going to be easy to build around, but there's definitely some options there if you're willing to try and tinker around with big drawbacks. And if that doesn't seem like your plan, then there are other options, both in the Marauder and also in the rest of the game. With Ancestral Commander, I'm actually going to have to put my face over the way that everything links together, because there's a lot of really intriguing things that are available here that are quite different to other things in the game. So in the top left, there's a whole bunch of summon spirit effects that were things that were available during the Trials of the Ancestors League. These are still available in Permanent Standard, but they're not available in the COA game. And so you can experiment with those if you want. They do have a fairly low uptime, so they tend not to be the strongest things around. You can only pick one of them, and my advice is probably don't pick one when they cost an entire Ascendancy. But the reason that I move my face out of the way, of course, is for the 4-pointer Ancestral Defiance. This is behind Ancestral Endurance, which is already good, plus 3 maximum endurance charges. This doesn't fit every build, but it is an intrinsically really strong effect. But then Ancestral Defiance reads, gain 15% of missing unreserved life before being hit by an enemy. So if you have 6,000 life, and you're currently sitting at 2,000 because you took a massive hit just before, then anytime you're hit, you are going to gain 600 life before the damage from the new hit is taken off you. And that includes, even if that hit only does 30 damage. This is an incredibly powerful effect. It's available on the unique amulet Defiance of Destiny, and that thing is tier 0 rarity for a reason. Defiance of Destiny is still really, really strong despite having been nerfed substantially in the past, and Ancestral Defiance making it available to more players is going to be really interesting. On top of that, there's a lot of support for strike skills in this Ancestral Commander Ascendancy. Ancestral Reach and Ancestral Echo both provide tools that strike-based builds can really use. Not necessarily granting more damage, but granting more clear speed, and that can be a really big thing to have. So that's the Ancestral Commander. Then we have the Scavenger. Now, I had gone out and predicted that the Scion Ascendancy was going to be something that looked exactly like the Ascendant, but that would be called the Descendant instead. I was completely and utterly wrong. Let's demonstrate what exactly this is. The Scion's Ascendancy is going to be based upon the theme of just scavenging weird and wonderful items from monsters. Now, I'm going to cover Doedre's Tongue here, so you won't be able to see that when we get to it, but that's one of the less exciting of these abilities anyway. So, a number of these are effects that you might recognize from unique items in PathOfExile 1. Status Prison at least has been changed a little bit, but most of these have the same effect that unique items that are well known are known for. I want to particularly point out Cloak of Flame. 40% of physical damage from hits is taken as fire damage. The reason I want to point this out is that you can stack this with an actual Cloak of Flame or with a Lightning Coil, and by doing so, you can mitigate physical damage entirely, really easily with this Ascendancy. So if you're wearing Cloak of Flame and then a Lightning Coil, that's going to be 90% of physical damage that you suffer is shifted into elements. Now, you still need to provide mitigation against those elements, but that's something that you can do. It falls to Editing GOG to point out one important thing here, and that is that this is specifically damage taken from hits on the Cloak of Flame Ascendancy node. This is different to the real Cloak of Flame item, which also applies to physical damage taken from damage over time sources. So you will be a bit more susceptible, especially if you elect to go the Lightning Coil approach, where you end up having 50% of physical damage from hits taken as lightning, as well as 40% of physical damage from hits taken as fire. If you do decide to go down that route, then you are going to be fairly susceptible to physical damage over time. There's not a huge amount of sources of it, but they do exist and they can be fairly scary. So I want to point that out to you. If you use a real Cloak of Flame, then you're looking at 40% of physical damage from damage over time, plus 80% of physical damage from hits being shifted into elements there. But all you need at this point is 10% more of this stat somewhere else, which you can definitely get, even after a lot of the sources of this were removed. And you end up in a spot where you are really, really, really tanky against physical damage as soon as you get your elemental resistances sorted. Note that this is not going to be super strong early in the game. It's something that comes online a bit later, but it is really, really strong. The Chevron's wrapping option is really strong as well. Shove wraps are something that's fallen out of the meta a fair bit in recent times, but that's not so much because the Chevron's wrapping's effect has become weak. It's more that just the opportunity cost of tying up your chest piece has become higher. Chaos damage taken does not bypass Energy Shield is a stat that allows you to play low life builds, which means that you reserve 80-90% of your life and then get a whole bunch of extra auras for doing that. And in addition to getting the benefits of those auras, you're also in a position to use Pain Attunement. This is something, though, that you can now use in conjunction with build-defining chest pieces, which is something you haven't been able to do before. On top of that, if you just want raw power instead, Stasis Prison defensively or Blunderbore offensively are both really, really good choices here. Now, you see that there's no information given about things that are at the top or at the bottom. They're on a separate slide that Grinding Your Games have provided. But I think the things that are really worth keeping an eye on are Fury Valve. With Fury Valve, if you have a skill that would fire out 3 projectiles, instead what it's going to do, that 3 will become 5 because Fury Valve is +2 projectiles here, but it will fire out 1 projectile, and when that hits something, it will then look for 5 targets, and it will fire out a copy of that projectile at those 5 targets. This splitting mechanic is really strong for clear, and Fury Valve is a unique item that you can get that provides it, but now you can get it as an Ascendancy notable instead. Likewise, Leadership's price is phenomenal. Leadership's price has a fair bit of setup. You need to have your 2 highest attributes be equal, otherwise it does nothing. Well, it's not that it does nothing, it still prevents you from using Ignite, Chill, Freeze, and Shock, but it doesn't give you any upside. But if you can balance your 2 top attributes, then all damage that you do, whether it be physical, whether it be chaos, whether it be elemental, all of it inflicts Scorch, Brittle, and Sap. Now, Scorch reduces monsters' elemental resistances, Brittle makes them more susceptible to critical hits, and this stacks in one of the most favourable ways possible with other things that increase crit chance, and Sap nerfs the amount of damage that those monsters do. All 3 of these alternate ailments are strong. Leadership's price is normally the only way to get these 3 confluxes at once, and it takes up your entire amulet slot, which is one of the most powerful slots in the game. Now, if you're interested in playing around with it in Legacy of Phrecia, the opportunity cost of taking Leadership's price here on the Scavenger is pretty high, but it's probably lower than using your amulet slot, especially with how good rare amulets can get with reflected heist jewelry. So we're now going to have a look at the North cluster that's available on the Scion Scavenger Ascendancy. This Ascendancy, you can only get 1 thing from the left side, or 1 thing from the right side, and 1 thing from either the top or the bottom. So there's a high opportunity cost to all of these, but there is also a lot of power to be had here. The ones that jump out to me as the most exciting, and this is not to say that you can't use Cerebrus Limb or the Fulcrum or Midnight Bargain. The really exciting ones, this is a chance to get Battle Mage, which is really hard to get. Battle Mage allows your spells to deal additional damage based upon the attack damage that's on your main-handed weapon. Obliteration is phenomenal for clear speed. This is very similar to Profane Bloom in the Occultist Ascendancy in the base game, but it has a slightly different condition. It does not require the enemy to be cursed. And then there's Void Battery, which is phenomenal in conjunction with a real Void battery, honestly. +1 maximum power charges is really nice. 25% increased spell damage per power charge is really nice. None of the real Void battery's drawback of 80% reduced spell damage. And as a result, this ends up being a great all-around package. But the only thing that's better than one Void battery is 2 or 3 of them. So if you are using this, you probably do want to use the wand as well, as soon as you're able to afford it. That said, there's nothing wrong with just starting out with this Void battery as well. Use it until you're able to get the real deal. And then if we have a look down the bottom, you'll see there's a whole bunch of other options that are available to you as well. That's the Scavenger Ascendancy. That's the last one that was revealed. And that is basically everything when it comes to going through all of the new Ascendancies, with the exception of that Surfcaster video that's still on its way. And so that is the Legacy of Phrecia event, everything that we know about it so far. My own personal plans for this event, I'm going to be doing some sort of group push event. Still working out the exact details of this, not necessarily going to be going super hard at this. This will be not like when you have groups that have a really tight team that try and push through the game, be the first to clear everything, and have a highly professionalized trading system that's set up. Instead, I'm going to do something that's a bit more chill and relaxed. That's going to be organized out of my Discord, and I'll put a link to that down in the description below. Other than that, I think I'm going to leave it there. May your Valorbs have interesting results. Please don't use one on your Ascendancies, and I will see you in the Legacy of Phrecia event.